The storm arrived without warning. Amina had learned to live like that, quietly, carefully, always watching the horizon for things that shouldn't come back. She was locking the cafe door, the salt wind pulling at her curls, her beige coat damp at the shoulders, when she felt it. That pressure behind her ribs. The kind that had no name but always meant danger. Her hands stilled on the lock. Across the rain-soaked cobblestones, beneath a sky that had turned the color of old bruises, a man stood beside a black car she didn't recognize. But she recognized him. 7 years older. Harder. Still. Ju Yong. His long black coat hung heavy with rain, tattoos darkening against the wet skin of his hands, his jaw set like something carved from every year she had spent running. He wasn't searching anymore. He had already found what he came for. Because his eyes weren't on her. They were on the twins. Her boys pressed instinctively against her sides, 2 small bodies in matching dark jackets, their curls damp, their faces turned toward the stranger across the street with that quiet, unblinking intensity she had never been able to explain. Until now. Because whoever they looked at him the same way mirrors look at the truth. The older twin tilted his head slowly. Ju Yong's breath broke. Amina saw it. The exact moment something inside the most feared man she had ever known quietly shattered on a public street in the rain. Her arm tightened around both boys. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of rebuilding, of convincing herself the decision she made that night in his penthouse was the only decision that could have kept him alive. 7 years of raising his sons without his name, without his face, without ever letting herself grieve what she buried the night she ran. And now he was standing 10 feet away. Older. Colder. More dangerous. And looking at her children like a man who had just been handed back everything the world stole from him. Neither of them spoke. The rain fell between them, relentless, cold, indifferent to the 7 years of buried secrets trembling at the surface. But underneath the fear, underneath the survival instinct screaming at her to grab her sons and run, a part of Amina that she had never fully silenced whispered something worse. He never knew. And he never stopped looking. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. The town of Mersol didn't ask questions. That was the first thing Amina loved about it, the way the fishermen nodded at her each morning without needing to know her last name, the way the old women at the market accepted her broken Portuguese and her 2 serious-faced boys without ever asking where their father was. The Atlantic wind came in hard off the water every evening and swept everything clean. Gossip. Memory. History. She had built a life inside that silence. 7 years was long enough to stop flinching at black cars. Long enough to let the twins run along the harbour wall without her heart lurching every time a stranger glanced at them too long. Long enough to believe, most mornings, that she had actually escaped. A Casa du Mar, the cafe she had scraped together with savings and stubbornness, smelled like dark roast coffee and warm bread and the faint ocean salt that never fully left anything in Mersol. She had painted the sign herself. She had sanded the tables herself. Every small imperfect thing inside it belonged to her in a way that nothing in her previous life ever had. Her boys made the mornings worth opening. Kofi was the older twin by 4 minutes and carried those 4 minutes like authority. He had her stubbornness and a stillness in his eyes that sometimes stopped strangers mid-sentence, a quiet, measuring quality that had nothing to do with childhood and everything to do with something inherited she had never let herself name. He read constantly. He asked questions that had no comfortable answers. He looked at the ocean like it owed him something. Day was softer in his silences but sharper in his observations. He drew everything, the harbour, the cats on the steps, his brother's sleeping face, and once, without explanation, a skyline she had never shown him. Tall glass towers. Cold steel geometry. A city that looked nothing like Mersol. She had folded that drawing very carefully and hidden it at the back of her wardrobe, and she had not looked at it again. They were 7 years old and they were the only reason she had never let herself fall apart completely. She watched them now through the cafe window as the evening light turned copper over the cobblestones. Kofi was balanced on the harbour wall, arms out, performing some private calculation of wind and balance. Day sat below him on the steps with his sketchbook, already capturing his brother's silhouette. The sea churned grey-green behind them, and the first real clouds of the coming storm were rolling in from the west, heavy and dark. Amina began lowering the cafe shutters. The last customers had gone an hour ago. The chairs were already upturned on the tables. This was her life. Quiet. Contained. Safe. She had paid a price for that safety that she did not let herself calculate anymore, because the mathematics of it, what she had surrendered, what she had never told him, what she had allowed his sister to take from her with nothing more than a threat and a darkness in her eyes, those numbers never came out even. They never produced an answer she could live inside comfortably. So she had stopped calculating. She wiped down the counter instead. She brewed tomorrow's first batch of beans. She listened to the storm beginning to press against the windows and told herself the tightness in her chest was just the weather. She was reaching for the door when she saw him. Her hand stopped on the latch. For a moment she genuinely believed she was imagining it. That she had finally spent 7 years thinking about a man so completely that her mind had conjured him from rain and low light and the particular quality of loneliness that sometimes ambushed her on stormy evenings. But ghosts don't get wet. And the man standing across the cobblestones was soaked through, his black coat darkened with rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, tattoos visible on the hand hanging at his side. He was taller than memory. Older. There was something in the architecture of his stillness that had deepened in 7 years, the way dangerous things do when they have been waiting a very long time. Ju Yong. The name moved through her like a current. She didn't breathe. She didn't move. She stood behind her cafe door and watched him standing in the rain on a Portuguese cobblestone street and understood with absolute clarity that the life she had built so carefully over 7 years had just developed a fracture she would never be able to seal again. Then Kofi jumped down from the harbour wall. And the world ended. She was through the door before she had decided to move, her coat half on, reaching for her sons with both arms. She pulled them against her sides, Kofi's solid warmth on her left, Day's sketchbook pressing into her ribs on her right, and she straightened and made herself face him. His eyes moved from her face to the twins. And then they stopped. She watched him see it. The thing she had hidden for 7 years, standing right there in damp jackets on a Portuguese harbour street, looking back at him with his own eyes. Kofi's chin lifted slightly, that measuring quiet sliding across his face. Day simply stared, his pencil forgotten, with the open unself-conscious attention of a child who has spent years drawing everything he finds beautiful or significant. Ju Yong's entire body went very still. Not the controlled stillness she remembered, the predator's patience he wore like armor in rooms full of dangerous men. This was something different. Something that moved underneath the surface of him like a crack traveling through stone. He crossed the street slowly. She held her ground because her legs had stopped receiving instructions from any rational part of her mind. He stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that she could see the rain on his eyelashes. Close enough that 7 years of distance collapsed into something that had no name and no resolution and no clean edges. He looked at her sons for a long time. Then he looked at her. Amina. 1 word. Her name. Said in the particular register he had always reserved for things that cost him something. How old? He said quietly. It was not really a question. Her throat closed. Ju Yong. How old are they? 7, she said. And the word fell between them like a stone dropped into deep water, and they both stood there listening to it sink. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not yet. Something rawer than anger. Something that looked like a man being shown a room that had existed for 7 years without him knowing where the door was. She should explain. She had rehearsed this, in the dark, in the years when sleep wouldn't come. She had rehearsed every version of how this conversation might happen, every combination of words that could make 7 years of silence make sense. But standing in front of him in the rain with his sons pressed against her sides, every rehearsed sentence turned to water. So she said the only thing that was completely true. I thought I was protecting you. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark above the cafe listening to the storm and to her sons breathing in the next room and to the particular silence that follows a confrontation that has resolved nothing. Ju Yong had not come inside. He had looked at her for a long moment after she spoke, something working behind his eyes that she couldn't read anymore. 7 years had added rooms to him she didn't have maps for, and then he had said, very quietly, "We're not finished," and walked back to the black car and disappeared into the rain. The twins had asked if she knew that man. She had said yes. Kofi had looked at her the way he sometimes did. Not like a child asking a question, but like someone who already has the answer and is simply waiting to see if the adults in his life will tell the truth. She had made them hot chocolate and read to them until they slept, and then she had sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cold cup and let herself go back to the night she had spent 7 years running from. It came back the way it always did, in fragments. The elevator rising toward his penthouse floor. The strange unease she had felt all evening, a pressure in her chest she hadn't been able to name. The doors opening. And then the scene that had rewritten everything. His sister, Ju Yong, 3 years older than Ju Yong, immaculate and cold and always looking at Amina like she was something that had wandered into the wrong building, was in the center of the room. Her hands on Ju Yong's forearms. Her face too close to his. And Ju Yong stepping back, his expression tight, his voice low and controlled in a way that should have told Amina something was deeply wrong between them rather than between them. But she hadn't heard the words. She had only seen the image. And the image had done what images always do. It had told a story that was complete and devastating and entirely false. She had turned and walked back to the elevator. Ju Yong had found her in the lobby. Amina still remembered the exact quality of the woman's stillness. The way she had spoken without raising her voice, the way people speak when they have absolute confidence in their power. You will leave Seoul tonight. You will not contact him. You will not tell him where you are going. Amina had started to refuse. He has enemies who have been looking for a reason to reach him through someone he loves. Ju Yong had tilted her head slightly. You would be that reason. You would be the opening they need. And when they find it, she had let the silence complete the sentence for her. He will survive this empire, Ju Yong had said finally. He will not survive loving you. Amina had been 3 weeks pregnant. She hadn't known yet. She hadn't known that the decision she made in that lobby, terrified, heartbroken, already calculating how to disappear, was a decision she was making for 3 people. She had left that night. She had told herself, in the months that followed, that it was the only choice. That Ju Yong was right. Amina came from nothing, knew nothing about empires and bloodlines and the particular mathematics of criminal inheritance, and her presence in Ju Yong's life was a vulnerability his enemies would eventually exploit. She had told herself this story so many times it had become structural. The thing her life was built on. Now she sat in the dark above a Portuguese cafe and turned the story over in her hands like something she had been carrying so long she'd forgotten to question its shape, and she thought about the way Ju Yong had stepped back from his sister that night. Not toward her. Back. He came back in the morning. She was opening the cafe, her sons eating breakfast at the corner table, Kofi reading, day drawing, when she heard the car outside and felt the specific quality of stillness that preceded him like weather. He was dressed differently. Dark trousers, a black high-neck sweater, the coat gone. He looked less like a silhouette and more like a man, which was in some ways worse. She could see the grey that had started at his temples. She could see the way he looked at her cafe with its mismatched chairs and its hand-painted sign with an expression she couldn't categorize. She stepped outside before he could come in. They're eating, she said. I don't want. I'm not here to frighten them. His voice was even. I'm not here to frighten you. Then what are you here for? He looked at her steadily. You said you thought you were protecting me. She waited. I want to understand what that means. Ju Yong. 7 years, Amina. Something fractured slightly in the evenness of his voice. Just slightly. 7 years I spent dismantling every network, calling in every debt, destroying connections I'd spent a decade building. Every city, every name, every lead that led to nothing. He paused. I need to understand what I was searching for. She felt the words land exactly where they were aimed. The cafe door opened behind her and Kofi appeared, still holding his book, studying Ju Yong with that unnerving assessment. Oma, he said, the Korean word she had taught him without quite letting herself examine why. Your coffee's boiling. She looked at her son who had his father's eyes and his father's stillness and an entire father's lifetime of absence written into questions he had never directly asked her. Go inside, she said gently. I'll be right there. Kofi looked at Ju Yong for one long moment. Ju Yong looked back. The boy turned and went inside. The silence that followed had a different quality to it. Heavier, more complicated. He called you Oma, Ju Yong said quietly. I taught them some Korean. She paused. I didn't want them to have nothing of, she stopped. Of me, he finished. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He exhaled slowly, looking at the cafe window where she could see both boys now watching from behind the glass with careful, serious faces. Tell me what she said to you, he said. Ji-yun. Whatever she told you that night. Tell me all of it. And something in the steadiness of how he said it, not angry, not accusatory, just a man who had spent 7 years building toward this exact question, unlocked something in her chest that she had not realized was still bolted shut. She told him. She watched him go very quiet in the particular way she remembered. That absolute stillness that meant he was feeling something large and keeping it perfectly contained through an act of will that most people would mistake for coldness. He stood outside her cafe in the morning light for a long time after she finished. Then, I rejected her plan that night. She wanted to use you. Position you somewhere public where my rivals could take you and send a message. I refused. We argued. That's what you walked into. Amina's hands were very cold. The threat she made you. His voice was quiet. Controlled. Dangerous only if you knew how to listen for it. She was not protecting me. She was protecting herself. There are things about that empire, about what she has built inside it, that she needed me emotionally destroyed to prevent me from seeing. The wind off the harbor moved through her curls. I didn't know, she said. It came out small. No. He turned to look at her. Neither did I. Not fully. Not yet. He paused. But I'm beginning to. She looked at him, this man she had loved and lost and spent 7 years carefully not thinking about, standing in the ordinary morning light of the life she had built in his absence, and felt something shift in the careful architecture of her survival. Fear, she knew how to manage. Distance, she had mastered. But the way Ju Yong was looking at her, not with the cold authority she'd expected, not with the anger she'd prepared for, but with something exhausted and careful and almost unbearably honest. That she had no defenses left for. The boys, she said. They're not safe if you're here. They're not safe if I'm not. He said it simply. Without performance. My organization has eyes everywhere, Amina. If I found you, others will too. And they will not stand outside your cafe in the morning and ask questions. She knew he was right. She hated that she knew. 1 week, she said finally. You stay. We talk. And then I decide what happens next. He looked at her for a moment. You decide, he agreed. And for the first time in 7 years, Amina felt the specific vertigo of something she had buried beginning, very slowly, to breathe again. She was not ready for it. She turned and went back inside to her sons, to the smell of coffee and the familiar weight of the life she had built, and she felt him watching the door long after she closed it. Patient, certain, waiting the way he had apparently been waiting for 7 years. Kofi looked up from his book when she sat down. He has our eyes, her son said matter-of-factly, and returned to his page. Amina wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and said nothing. Outside, the morning light stretched long and gold across the wet cobblestones of Mersol. And somewhere in the distance, the ocean kept moving, indifferent to all the things that were no longer possible to keep buried. The week became 2. Amina told herself it was practical. Ju Yong's argument about exposure was sound. If his organization had tracked her to Mersol, then his presence was at least a known variable she could calculate around. She told herself this carefully, the way she told herself many things, while watching him sit across from Kofi at the corner table each morning. Both of them bent over the same book, neither speaking, completely at ease in the silence they had apparently already discovered they shared. Day was less contained about it. By the 4th day he had decided Ju Yong was a legitimate subject and had begun drawing him. Studying him openly the way he studied the harbor cats and the storm clouds, with total unself-conscious concentration. Ju Yong had looked at the first finished sketch for a long time without speaking. Then he had asked Day, very quietly, if he could keep it. Day had said yes and immediately started another. Amina watched all of this from behind the cafe counter and understood she was in serious trouble. It wasn't the old feeling, not the reckless freefall of loving him inside a dangerous world when she had been 24 and naive enough to believe love was sufficient armor. This was slower, more considered, more frightening, because she was older now and had no excuse for it. She was watching a man carefully learn the shape of his own children. The way Kofi's humor appeared sideways and delayed, always 3 beats after the moment. The way Day needed quiet after crowds, how he pressed his shoulder against something solid when he was overwhelmed. Ju Yong catalogued all of it with the same focused attention he'd apparently spent years applying to finding her, and she could not look at it directly for very long without something in her chest doing something she couldn't afford. She should have been more vigilant about what was circling outside. The first sign was small enough to dismiss. A car she didn't recognize parked twice on the same street in 3 days. A man at the far end of the harbor who took photographs of the coastline but whose lens kept returning to the cafe. She noticed these things the way she had trained herself to notice things over 7 years. Quietly, without reaction, filing them away. She said nothing to Ju Yong. She should have. On the 9th evening of his stay, his phone lit up with a call he took outside, standing at the harbor wall with his back to the cafe, and when he came back his face had changed. The warmth, that careful, emerging warmth she had been watching develop like a photograph in a darkroom, was gone. In its place was the other version of him. The version that ran an empire. Someone sent photographs to Ji Yun, he said. Of the boys. The cafe went cold. She's been in contact with 2 senior members of my organization, he continued. His voice was measured but she could hear what lived underneath it. Men who have been positioning themselves for 18 months. I didn't understand what they were building toward. He paused. I do now. What are they building toward? He looked at her steadily. My sons are heirs. Direct bloodline. Under the founding charter of my family's organization, a charter I never revoked because I never imagined it would matter, they hold inheritance rights that supersede appointments I've already made. He paused. There are men in my organization whose positions become conditional the moment those boys are formally recognized. The silence in the cafe was complete. Ji Yun told them, Amina said. Ji Yun has been working with them for at least 2 years. Something moved behind his eyes, a grief he was not going to perform for her. She didn't separate us to protect the empire, Amina. She separated us to protect her access to it. And to keep me isolated enough that I wouldn't see what she was constructing. Amina sat down slowly. All of it, every calculation she had made that night in the lobby, every reason she had accepted Ji Yun's logic, every year she had spent believing she was the problem, reassembled itself in front of her into a completely different shape. She used me, Amina said. She used both of us. The recording arrived the next morning. It came through one of Ju Yong's men, a quiet, careful operative named Shin who Amina would later learn had been the person who helped her escape 7 years ago, who had known the threat against her was real and had made sure she reached the coast safely without Ju Yong's knowledge, because he understood that she needed distance before she needed truth. Shin had spent 7 years collecting insurance. This was some of it. 20 minutes of audio from a security system inside the penthouse. 7 years old. Amina listened to it alone in the cafe kitchen while the boys were at the harbor with Ju Yong. She heard herself arrive. The elevator. Her footsteps. She heard Ji Yun's voice, sharp, pressured, insistent. She heard Ju Yong's response. You will not touch her. You will not position her. You will not use anyone I love as a piece in whatever you're building. We're finished with this conversation. His voice. Unmistakable. 7 years ago, in the room she had walked into and misread with devastating completeness. The recording continued. Ji Yun's tone shifting, calculating, cold. Then she leaves. Or I ensure the Beck faction knows exactly how to reach you. You don't. She leaves, or you lose everything you've built. And you know I'm not making a threat, Ju Yong. I'm explaining mathematics. Amina sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and the phone in her hands and let herself feel the full weight of what 7 years of a single misread moment had cost. Not just her. All of them. She was not someone who cried easily. She had learned early that tears were expensive, and she had spent her resources carefully for a very long time. But alone on the kitchen floor of the cafe she had built from survival and stubbornness, with the recording still warm in her hands, she let herself grieve it. The relationship, the years, the version of herself who had stood in that lobby and believed the worst because she had never quite believed she deserved the best. She let herself grieve it completely. And then she wiped her face and stood up. Because her sons were at the harbor with their father, and something was circling them that she had helped create, and grief was not something she had the luxury of carrying for very long. Ju Yong found her at the counter when he brought the boys back. He read her face the way he always had, accurately, completely, without requiring explanation. He looked at Shin, who had materialized quietly near the door. "Take them upstairs," Ju Yong said. Shin gestured to the twins with the particular gentle authority of a man who has spent years being trusted by dangerous people. The boys, reading the room with their inherited precision, went without argument. Ju Yong sat across from her. "You heard it," he said. "All of it." The silence between them had a different texture now. Not the guarded distance of the past 9 days. Something more exposed. "I thought you chose her," Amina said. "I thought what I saw was, I thought you chose your family and your empire and that I was the thing you were willing to release." She met his eyes. "I never thought she threatened me to protect herself. I never thought I was a resource she was managing. I know. I ran because I thought staying would destroy you." Her voice was very even. "And running destroyed us anyway." "Yes. She wins either way." "She did," he said. "For 7 years." He leaned forward slightly. "She won't for a single day more." Amina looked at him across the table, this man carrying 7 years of searching and grief in the stillness of his face, and understood that forgiveness was not one decision. It was a long, slow process of choosing every morning to put down something very heavy. She thought she might be willing to start. "What happens now?" she said. "Now I end it," he said simply. She should have known the endgame would not wait for them to be ready. It came on a Tuesday. An ordinary morning, Kofi at the corner table, Day on the steps outside with his sketchbook, Amina behind the counter, Ju Yong on a call in the back room. The cafe was quiet. The harbor was bright. She went to the door to call Day in for breakfast. The steps were empty. She looked toward the harbor. Kofi's chair scraped as he looked up, sensing something, and she was already moving through the door when she saw the second sketchbook lying on the cobblestones 20 feet away, pages wet, pencil beside it like something dropped in haste. "No, Day." She turned and ran. "Kofi," she was back through the door, grabbing his arm. "Where is your brother? When did you last?" He was just outside. Kofi's voice was alarmed now, his composure fracturing the way it only did when he was genuinely frightened. "Ju Yong." He was already in the doorway. He took one look at her face and the empty steps and something happened to his expression that she had never seen before. Not anger, not calculation, something rawer and more absolute than either of those things. He had his phone out before she finished speaking. Within minutes, Marseille stopped being a quiet coastal town and became something else entirely. Cars arrived from 3 directions. Men she had never seen materialized at the harbor entrance. Ju Yong moved through all of it with a terrifying calm, issuing instructions in Korean too fast and too low for her to follow, while Kofi stood pressed against her side, very still, very white. Then Kofi said, "The man with the camera." Ju Yong turned. "He was here 3 times, Kofi said. Steady voice. His father's steadiness in miniature. Blue jacket. He talked to Day once near the wall. Day showed him his drawings." Ju Yong looked at his son for one moment with an expression Amina would remember for the rest of her life. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good." And the word carried everything, acknowledgement, recognition, a father telling his child, "I see you," across all the years they had not had. Then he was back on the phone, and Amina held Kofi against her side, and the longest hours of her life began. They found the sketchbook trail first. Day, taken quickly and without sufficient time to prepare him, had done the only thing available to him. He had torn pages from the sketchbook in his jacket pocket and dropped them from the vehicle. Small pencil drawings. The harbor. A road sign. A warehouse shape repeated twice. Shin had the location within 4 hours. An abandoned shipyard 40 minutes up the coast. Owned through 3 layers of corporate obscurity by a holding company connected to the 2 executives Ju Yong had been cultivating. Ju Yong was there too. Amina knew this because Ju Yong told her, standing in front of her with his coat on and his men assembled outside and his face carrying everything he wasn't going to say. "I'm coming," Amina said. "Amina. He is my son." She said it quietly and completely. "I have been protecting my sons alone for 7 years, and I am not standing in this cafe while you go and get him. I am not capable of that." He looked at her for a long moment. "Stay with Shin," he said. "You do not move without Shin." She agreed. The shipyard smelled like rust and salt and old machinery. Amina stayed back as instructed, right up until the moment she heard Day cry out from somewhere inside the building, and then the instruction became theoretical. She moved. Shin, to his credit, moved with her. The inside of the building was chaos organized around Ju Yong's will, his men moving through the space with practiced efficiency. The 2 executives hired security outmatched almost immediately by the difference between men who were paid and men who were loyal. She found Day in a locked office on the upper level. He was frightened but unharmed, pressed into a corner with his remaining sketchbook clutched to his chest, and when she pulled the door open and he saw her face, he crossed the room and hit her so hard with the weight of his 7-year-old body that she nearly fell. She held him. She held him so completely that there was nothing left of her outside of it. "I left drawings, Oma," he said into her shoulder. "I know," she said. "I know you did. You were so brave. I knew you'd follow them." She pulled back to look at his face, this extraordinary child, her son, his father's sharpness and her own resourcefulness somehow combined into someone entirely his own, and she kissed his forehead and said, "Always. I will always follow." The confrontation with Ji Yun happened in the main floor of the shipyard, surrounded by people who had built their positions on her maneuvering and were now watching it collapse. She was immaculate even here. Even now. She stood in the center of the space with the particular composure of someone who had spent a lifetime calculating exits, and when Ju Yong walked toward her through the cleared space between his men, something in her expression shifted. Not guilt, not quite, but the look of someone who had known this accounting was inevitable and had simply kept deferring it. 7 years, Ju Yong said. Ji Yun lifted her chin. "Everything I did." "Don't." His voice was very quiet. "Don't tell me it was for the family. Don't tell me it was for the empire. I know what you were building and who you were building it with, and I know the night you sent her away had nothing to do with protecting me." The silence in the shipyard was total. "You broke something that didn't need to be broken," he said. "And then you spent 7 years making sure it stayed broken. And you used my children, children you knew existed, children of my bloodline, as leverage with men who would have had them killed to secure their positions." Ji Yun said nothing. "You're finished," he said simply. "Everything you built inside my organization is finished. And every man in this room who chose your construction over my family will have time to reflect on that decision." He turned away from her. The men who had stayed loyal, the majority, as it turned out, Ji Yun had miscalculated the depth of their allegiance to her, closed the space behind him. It was Day who completed it, without knowing that he did. He was standing with Amina near the shipyard entrance, Shin beside them, when Ju Yong came toward them across the concrete floor. He was not performing anything, not authority, not composure, not the careful emotional restraint she had watched him maintain for 2 weeks. He was just moving toward his sons with the directness of a man who has run out of reasons to be anything other than exactly what he is. Day watched him approach. Then, with the same total unself-conscious certainty with which he drew everything he found significant, he took 3 steps forward and wrapped both arms around Ju Yong's waist. Ju Yong stopped. Amina saw it happen, the thing she had watched building for 2 weeks finally arriving, the moment the architecture of 7 years of grief met something stronger than itself. His arms came around Day, and the breath he released was the quietest, most complete sound she had ever heard from him. Kofi watched this for exactly as long as his dignity required. Then he crossed the floor and stood beside his brother, and Ju Yong's other arm came around him, and the 3 of them stood in the center of an abandoned shipyard on a Portuguese coast, and Amina stood 10 feet away and watched the family she had been raising in half-form finally become whole. She didn't realize she was crying until Ju Yong looked up at her over their sons' heads. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He simply held out his hand. She crossed the floor. And for the first time in 7 years, she stopped running. Marisol at dawn was the color of something beginning. The storm had finally cleared overnight, and the light came in low and gold off the water, turning the wet cobblestones into something that looked like a painting day might make. The cafe was closed. The harbor was quiet. The 4 of them were at the table by the window, Kofi with his book but not reading it, Day with his sketchbook already open, Ju Yong with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup and his eyes on the boys with the steady, undisguised attention of a man who has decided he is not going to miss another morning. Amina sat across from him and thought about the strange arithmetic of loss and return. 7 years. 2 children. 1 misread moment and 1 woman who had weaponized it. And somehow, on the other side of all of it, this table. This light. These 4 people drinking coffee in a small cafe above a Portuguese harbor while the Atlantic turned silver outside the window. Oma, Day said, without looking up from his sketchbook. Is he staying? She looked at Ju Yong. Ju Yong looked back at her with an expression that asked nothing and offered everything and left the answer, as he had promised, entirely to her. She thought about the night she had stood in a lobby and chosen fear over faith. She thought about what it had cost. She thought about Kofi's 4 minutes older authority and Day's sketchbook trail and the recording she had listened to alone on a kitchen floor, and she thought about the long, slow work of choosing every morning to put down something heavy. Yes, she said. Day nodded as though this confirmed something he already knew and returned to his drawing. Kofi turned a page. Ju Yong reached across the table and covered her hand with his, unhurried, certain, the way a man touches something he has been searching for long enough that he no longer needs to rush, and outside, the sea kept moving and the light kept coming, and Marisol asked no questions at all.